a world within our world. They've created a world unlike any other world.
Dungeons and Dragons. And a game like D&D fuels their imagination and makes them feel special.
The ogre is amused by your joke and allows you to pass.
Dad, I'm just curious. What is it about Dungeons and Dragons that suddenly leapt out at you at age 60?
Dungeons, it'd be the dungeons.
Just what I love about role-playing games is being told exactly what to do.
Me too. You should introduce yourselves.
Hey guys, what's going on? You are listening to The Spellbook, only on CFRU 93.3. My name is Mike the Birdman, but I'm not alone as I trek through an interesting part of the tabletop role-playing game world. I'm joined by my compatriot from the Feywild, the forest city of London, Ontario, Canada.
Hi, I am Damien, and I am out in the middle of the forest of fake trees.
That's right. So guys, like I said, this is the Spellbook. This is the show right here on Guelph Community Radio that is dedicated to the tabletop role-playing game hobby. It could be Dungeons and Dragons, it could be Pathfinder, Cyberpunk, Shadowrun, Battletech, Vampire the Masquerade, Pugmire, and other games you've probably never heard of, but always want to get out to play. So last week on the show, well, there wasn't a show. It was a rebroadcast, mostly because I was dying, and it sucked. I don't know what happened. Truth be told, I think I had food poisoning. I was pretty sure I was on death's door. I'm pretty sure I failed 2 out of 3 death saves and was in the poison condition with 5 levels of exhaustion. TLDR, it sucked. But to kind of quantify how bad it was, I had to cancel D&D on my friends who I play with. Damien now, I am the DM for his group, and I'm thinking, oh, that's really bad. But normally I play with my private group with my friend Pete, Sam, and Tom, and I was like, guys, I think I'm dying. And that's how I know just how sick I was. Fortunately, after a day or two, started to bounce back and feel a lot better. I was up on campus feeling pretty good. So we are back this week. So in honor of, I don't know, while I was sick, started thinking in a medicine-induced haze, we shall say. And I started thinking about some ideas that me and Damien could bring to you guys. And today's show is going to be talking about backstories, stuff to make you, well, better characters. Like, what are some of the do's? What are some of the don'ts? What are some of the things you can do to make your character that much more interesting? And we're going to probably talk about a wide variety of different game systems today, different genres, stuff like that. It's not going to be strictly D&D or Pathfinder or fantasy adjacent. So today's conversation is going to go all over the place today. But this is something that I'm really glad me and Damien are going to be doing today, because you and I take our role-playing fairly seriously. Not like a job. Well, I guess in my case, it really kind of is. But we like to give our characters more depth. One of the best lessons I ever learned was from a YouTube video that I saw many, many years ago. And it was, be more than a stat block. And sometimes being flawed is fun. And it sort of came out of the idea way back in the day, in the long, long ago, before point buy was even a concept. When you used to roll characters, you had to roll 3d6 in order, and those determined what your stats were. So if you wanted to play Bob, the ultra amazing paladin, but you rolled a 10 in strength and an 8 in charisma, you may wish to reconsider career choices. May I suggest being a thief?
I hated those days of stat rolling. I hated, because I remember my first experience with D&D was 2nd edition, and that's what I was told to do. And I was like, well, it looks like I'm gonna have to plan my class now.
Yeah, and it's kind of I'm so glad you mentioned that. So, my friend Nick and I have been chatting, and we want to give our friend Pete a chance to play in something different because our friend Pete has been running our game for so long, and my friend Sam's kind of taken over duties. But we're like, okay, Pete still needs a break because we want to reward our longtime DM, and we're probably going to be playing AD&D Second Edition, which is going to be 3d6 in order. I'm horrified because I've had some really bad rolls. I've also heard of characters that get turned into what is affectionately known as the innkeeper. Um, Basically, when you're too weak to go outside, or when adventuring would be career suicide in this case. And I don't know, because you say you hated it. I find it interesting, and I kind of modified it. So eventually, 3d6 eventually became 4d6 drop the lowest, which is,
Yeah.
fine. I ran a game on TWIG on thisweekingeek.net called The Cambridge Chronicles. And the idea behind that was like, I wasn't going to make you do 3d6 in order, but I was going to make you roll 4d6, and you could drop the lowest once. And I had a friend of mine, let's call him Alan, and he was a power gamer. And he's like, oh, my character's going to suck. I'm like, I'm sorry you don't have 3 18s. I'd rather not fight Superman or Goku today.
Yeah,
And
I can dig that.
yeah, and it was like, okay, Alan, let's sit down. Okay, let's work this out. Let's see what we can come up with today. And what we eventually kind of came up with is I'm like, your flaws can be cool. And he's like, okay, what do you mean by that? Like, okay, just because you have a 10 charisma does not mean you look like a chud or cannibalistic humanoid underground dweller. If you're wondering what chud actually means, that's what it is, and it's a 1980s horror movie. You should check it out. But he's like, what do you mean? Like, you could just be really uncouth, or you could just be really rude in situations. Maybe you're unconventionally attractive, or like, for example, you and I, Damien, we know some reasonably attractive people, but sometimes their personalities suck.
Yeah.
So I would argue they have a low charisma score. And again, they could be a supermodel or, Captain America himself, but unless they're pleasant to talk to, you know what I mean? So eventually we started playing this game with me and my friend Alan, and he's like, okay, maybe this isn't so bad. I'm like, you're right. Now you're thinking, embrace those flaws. And if I recall, he had a really low dexterity score. And he's like, okay, what does this mean? Like, okay, just means you have really poor hand-eye coordination. What can you do to make up for that? He's like, I don't know. I was like, I'm pretty strong. That's right. You can swing a sword really hard, but you're not going to be snipering them from 300 feet away. He's like, okay, I can work with that. And he's like, oh, what can I do to personalize this? And I'm like, okay, well, you have poor hand-eye coordination. Maybe when you draw your bowstring, maybe you drop the arrow. Or, someone throws a baseball at you and you just can't catch it for whatever reason. Like, you're not stupid. You're just not picked first for dodgeball.
Yeah, I don't know. So, just to
Yeah,
interject,
of course.
I don't know, like, the whole, like, not catching the ball when thrown at you, that I can dig. The
Mhm.
only one I wouldn't get behind, and like I
Mhm.
can touch on this a little bit more at some point,
Mhm.
would be the when you draw your bowstring, you drop your arrow. I wouldn't want something like that because really it's already mechanically affecting combat,
Yeah.
having a
I mean,
low dex score like that. So like
yeah.
I wouldn't want to double penalize the player. So like
That might be like a critical fumble or something that I might pull
yeah,
that. I wouldn't do it as like a course of like, here's
yeah,
the thing I'm gonna do.
yeah, he rolls a 1, that's perfect flavor for that. Yeah,
exactly.
you know, when you go to knock your arrow, it just kind of slips out of your you know, it slips out of your hand, your fingers, and hits the ground, and you have to take the round to pick it up or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So when you look at your stats, you're more than that, right? So it's not just your strength, charisma, dexterity, constitution, charisma, and I think that's all 6 right there. Those are your typical role-playing game stats. So,
Yeah.
how do you make this character interesting? Well, every character should ultimately be a story. And that's why we kind of play these games, or at least that's why I play. Now, not everybody does that. Like some people build characters and they may be Bob the Adventurer and it's a dungeon crawl. What is a dungeon crawl? Dungeon crawl is typically your game master or whoever says, "Okay, I'm going to throw a bunch of really hard monsters at you. I want you to get to the end of this dungeon." And you're basically playing a video game beat 'em up
Yeah.
with pen and paper and your imagination. And that's fine. And sometimes that's really fun. Like that's a convention game. That's how old school AD&D used to be played when you would play like the Tomb of Annihilation or something. Here's your stack of character sheets. You may have 2 left at the end of this session
Yeah.
or whatever.
Or
And
or even as a side quest for the main story.
yeah,
You guys find an ancient dungeon and it's big, so you spend the whole session down there.
yeah. And it's when you create these characters, like you want to have something fun. And like again, like you're not going to play the janitor from your local high school. And much respect to sanitation people everywhere cuz they put up with a lot of our crap sometimes quite literally, but you want to play something that's fun, something that's interesting. So where does that journey start? And sometimes what's in a name? And another video that I saw many years ago was when you're creating your character, creating your backstory, you want a fun name. Like you want to be, I don't know. I found a lot of Lord of the Rings characters have like Od- Odor at the back of their names or like Aragon or whatever. Like just a lot of names that are really similar sounding, like
Yeah.
Boromir, Faramir, and just trying to keep all these names together. Like literally at one point, I know I'm a bad fantasy guy. I had to have the wiki opening. Okay, where like Boromir was Sean Bean, Faramir was Carl Urban, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm wrong, yell at me at Damien. What's that email address that people want to yell at me?
Thespellbookshow at gmail.com.
Okay, so now that I've made the Tolkien nerds mad, allow me to continue. But yeah, like you want to have a fun name, a really interesting idea, and like I said, having a cool name. You might be, trying to think. Well, I'm looking around the room, like, how can I generate? Okay, I see something interesting. Tommy. I know that name sounds boring, but I'm looking at my White Ranger helmet from Power Rangers. Okay, Tommy. What's another cool name? I have the BattleTech logo for Fox Patrol on my wall as a 3D printed sign. So Tommy Fox. Okay, now I've got a name. Who is Tommy Fox? Okay, Damien, as we go into break, you tell me as we design this character together. This may be another collaborative type episode, but also some general kind of pointers. What is Tommy Fox? What does he do?
Okay, so I'm on the whole maker kick right now. So I'm going to say they're a mechanic.
Interesting. Okay. Mechanic to me suggests modern day somewhat, at least. So I'm thinking industrial. I'm seeing either a Call of Cthulhu character here. I'm sensing maybe even a Shadowrun character, cyberpunk.
Thinking if we're going modern day, I would definitely lean more towards Shadowrunners.
I like that. So when we come back here on the Spellbook, we're going to be making Tommy Fox, the mechanic, do something a little bit more interesting. Once again, you are listening to 93.3 CFRU Guelph Community Radio. My name is Mike the Birdman. That is Damien Magical Hack. And we will be back right here on the Spellbook.
If you're looking for power, you certainly come to the right place because you are listening to CFRU 93.3 FM in Guelph. 250 watts of community power.
Welcome back to the Spellbook, right here on 93.3 CFRU Guelph Community Radio.
So, when we last left you, last time on Dragon Ball Z, we were designing a character to sort of demonstrate what a better backstory might look like. And as I looked around the room, like a child, we had come up with the name Tommy Fox. And Tommy Fox is a mechanic in the Shadowrun universe. Now, Shadowrun, oh boy, is my bread and butter. And that's a cyberpunk game, but it's a little bit different than what you may think. It is a mix of cyberpunk, but also magic. So again, Lord of the Rings meets The Matrix. That's the worst example I can think of. Just follow me. Okay.
What if cyberpunk, but with dragons?
Yes, there we go. Cyberpunk with dragons and fireballs. Okay, so Tommy Fox is the mechanic. What can I add to make his backstory interesting? Okay, Tommy he's a mechanic. Okay, I'm going to ask you some questions. Let's develop his backstory. Why did he become a mechanic, or does he specialize in anything?
So just considering this over the break there, what I kind of thought is maybe they were interested in like magical items. Like they're a mechanic. That's their day job.
Okay.
But what kind of got them interested in it in the first place was, after the world all went magical,
Mm-hmm.
there's, how do these items work?
Okay. I'm
things like
following you.
that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this is how you can make a really compelling backstory. Okay. So we know what the character does. Character has a name, even has a nickname built in if you want. You can call him Tommy, what his close personal friends call him, but because Shadowrun is built in the idea of these super cool criminals pulling jobs, aka Shadowruns, he needs a handle. Now, let's say Tommy Fox is fairly inexperienced. He's a new guy. So his street name is going to be Foxy. Okay. So you gave me the idea that this guy, the magical world has changed. The awakening has happened. Magic is just suddenly a thing. So Tommy, as a young mechanic, is like, the world is not what I thought it was. So maybe now I have to go to school. Oh, wait a second. Okay, Tommy's a mechanic, but now he's magically active. So, with his background, we're going to expand upon this because we're going to draw upon some of the world lore to give your game master and storyteller a little bit stuff to kind of pull on. So, we've decided that he's a young, inexperienced person in the world. A mechanic is his day job. That's what he did to pay the bills in UCAS, which is the United Canadian and American States. I know, yuck, but...
So there is one thing I want to interject here.
Yes, please.
I'm picturing this character as androgynous as humanly possible.
Okay, interesting.
2 reasons for this. One, Tommy is a unisex name, so that automatically, to me, just applied they, them pronouns to this specific character.
Okay,
and 2, if we, looking at it that way, if somebody decides to take this idea for their own, please do, by the way. Any ideas that we, anything that we create on the show, please use.
Yes.
We're doing it on the show so that it can get you. But anybody who decides to run with this idea can say if they want a, male or female Tommy.
Okay.
A la V from Cyberpunk.
Yes, I like this idea. Okay, so Tommy is trying to figure out where their place in the world is. So they're now magically active, but they also have to pay the bills. But they need to understand, okay, I know how an engine works. Like you turn this, the gas does this, combustion, whatever. So in the world of Shadowrun, for example, there are shamans, which draw upon nature spirits, spirits of man, stuff like that. A lot of more mysticism, but I would honestly say their power comes from willpower, or not will, sort of their connection to the natural world. Where on the other side of this are mages, and a mage is determined. They look at magic through math, formula, repetition. So what if Tommy had decided, okay, again, to use the engine example, like, okay, I know how the engine on Kawasaki, or no, the Harley Scorpion, which is a vehicle in Shadowrun. Like, okay, I know how a Harley Scorpion works. How do I cast invisibility? Wait a second. Because mana is how you manipulate magic. So he's like, okay, well, what if I did this and I really concentrated on this and I'm trying to figure out how this all comes together? And suddenly Tommy's casting spells. So they finally understand, okay, this is how I channel my magic. I understand it because magic is theory. Magic is math. Magic is a mechanical understanding of the world. So I'll throw this to you, Damien. So I'm going to say Tommy is college age. So they've been a mechanic for maybe 2 years. They've got their apprenticeship or whatever. Suddenly they are now slinging mojo. What happens to them next? They are young and the world has turned on its head.
I think so. Right now, we're talking about before Tommy ends up going down the criminal road.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think at this point, what would be interesting and kind of thematic for the universe would be Tommy starts working on a way to develop an engine that runs. Like,
Okay.
that's kind of their end point type deal. So that's
Okay.
kind of why they decided to go down the road of being like, say, a mage, and learning that alongside of, mechanical repair and whatnot.
Okay. I like this because now it gives them a goal, because now, again, they're starting to get steeped into the lore, because there are talismongers. That's the proper term in Shadowrun for people who deal in what's known as foci. So Tommy is looking at magic. Like, okay, I know how this works. I know how this functions. Can I apply what I understand about mechanics to other things? So sort of becoming like an old school artificer enchanter.
Yeah.
That's interesting because in Shadowrun, that's a very specialized gig. And that gives you a whole nother realm, because now when Tommy enters the dangerous world of the shadows, they're going to have to source for parts. They're going to have to source for magical items. Maybe now that there's paranormal animals in the world, like your dog, your beloved husky could randomly turn into a hellhound, or you could be out wandering through the brush and maybe you start running into bandersnatches, which is a type of metahuman that is infected with a virus. Oh, okay. Let's complicate Tommy's life a little bit.
All right.
He has contracted a virus, the human metahuman vampiric virus. So they rather, besides being androgynous as hell, now they've got something wrong with them. They're slowly turning into a ghoul, which means they now have to eat 2 pounds of human flesh per week, or they will die, or bad things start happening. So Tommy is smart. Tommy is resourceful. Tommy's now part of this new paranormal food chain. but people are interested because ghouls, they're powerful. They're weird, but they're powerful. And now they're a part of a different group of society. Do they use their magic to hide what they look like or how they appear to people? Or do they parlay their magical abilities and say, hey, I'm going to develop some really cool material for you. I need you to get me some stuff from the city morgue or a university's cadaver lab, and I need you to not ask me any questions. What do you think?
Or there is one more alternative.
Okay, I love it.
Do they become a much darker bat person?
Yeah, because now, again, you're looking at, like I said, you've taken the most boring stuff possible, and now you're throwing stuff at it. Like having complications in your role-playing game characters, it's not a bad thing. I'm not saying like Batman or Judge Dredd should be hunting you down, but because you are what you are, now you're introducing morality choice into it. You're giving your game master something to pull on, but that also gives you something to work with your group. So Tommy is going to have a group of friends who maybe they're wage slaves. They work in the they work for, I don't know, Seder Krupp, which is the big corporation run by the big dragon Loftwire. So they're making good money. And then they see you go through some problems. So, do your friends stay with you or do they leave? Because if your friend stays with you, that's a pretty cool inside info. But if your friend abandons you and leaves you out to dry, what do you do? Because now your game master can say, hey, there's a contact. Or your friends left you high and dry. Maybe you took something on the way out before they decided to ghost you and not text you back.
So I think the way I'm picturing Tommy, they probably had a fairly wide but shallow circle, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah.
So like after everything is said and done, I would say they'd probably only have like 3 people that could be considered contacts.
I like this. Yeah.
And only 2 of them have stuck with.
I like that because now you're introducing the idea of a long story arc. And what do I mean by that, folks? Tommy wants to reconnect. Let's call this missing friend. Let me look around the room a little bit more. Steven. They want to connect with Steven because they used to be chums. They used to be really good buddies. And maybe you were there when Steve's mom got really sick. And when you started to get sick, they couldn't handle it. And I know we're introducing a lot of deep ideas, but that's kind of what makes your character interesting. I think not living the power fantasy every moment of every dice roll is what makes your characters interesting, because we don't cheer Walter White from Breaking Bad because he is this super smart guy all the time. Walter White was a guy with cancer who had his back against the wall and had to do some pretty morally questionable things. And eventually he would say, what is my name? You're goddamn right. But he had to get to that point. Eventually he was just a high school science teacher who was a bit of a dork.
Yeah.
So
I know we're going to break very soon.
Yes.
I would actually like to propose a slight counter suggestion for the relationship with Steven when we come back.
I love it. What's going to happen to Tommy Fox, the ghoul mechanic in the world of Shadowrun? Well, you're going to have to stay tuned to find out. Once again, you are listening to 93.3 CFRU. My name is Mike the Birdman. That is Damien Magical Hack. And we're going to find out what happens to our friend Tommy right after this.
This is Eliza from Mauno, and you're listening to CFRU.
Welcome back to the Spellbook right here on 93.3 CFRU, Guelph Community Radio. So, before the break, we were talking about Tommy and their friend Steven. So, I think what could be an interesting way to approach this is Tommy is owed a favor by Steve for something
Okay.
that happened in the past.
Okay.
The drifting apart was actually because they both became magically active.
Okay.
However, Steven went down the path of a shaman
Okay.
rather than
I
the
like
path of a mage. So their paths just kind of split.
it. Mm-hmm.
And I think this happened before Tommy got infected.
I could see that. So when the world changed in the world of Shadowrun, a lot of stuff changed overnight. And again, people that are very mechanically minded, at least this is my own personal headcanon, I always felt like they may have had a slight edge because they think math and magic is formula. It just is. It's like no different than figuring out how to send a rocket into space. And I know that's incredibly complicated, but you have to generate this much thrust, this much lift, etc., escape velocity. It's math. With a shaman, maybe Steven, a different totem called to him than what he was expected. So in the world of Shadowrun, shamans are not just necessarily indigenous people. They could literally come from any culture. Like they could be, there are people who are shamans who are literally, their magic comes from voodoo or Loa, or they could come from a Eastern, Asian style of mysticism, but still it forms the same. They're still your city spirits, your hearth spirits, and your nature spirits. So when Steven's magic awakened, maybe his guardian spirit or his familiar had said, you know what? If you're really going to want to walk this path, the path of, let's say, the dog shaman. And the dog shaman, one of its characteristics is like, you're very loyal. You're a very good friend. But the dog shaman said, hey, maybe this guy's bad news for you. Maybe you need to find a new pack. Or maybe it was the wolf totem that called to him and said, this is not your pack, friend. You need to find somebody else. But as you mentioned, I love the idea of being owed a favor. What is that favor that will inevitably draw these two back together through fate, friendship, or perhaps something fatal?
Well, you mentioned that Tommy was there when Steven's mother was. Maybe Tommy ended up something that Tommy ended up doing during that time. Was able to either help generate money for like medicine to keep her as well as possible for longer.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe the town they grew up in was like, something similar to say Owen Sound, where
Okay.
there's a lot, like, it's not necessarily like a big city,
Okay.
and there's some forested area. Maybe Tommy knows their way around, natural, like, you know what I mean? Like natural herbs and plants that can be found, and was able to come up with something to kind of ease the mother's pain.
Yeah, I like that. And maybe that when the mother was getting sick, he's developing these, not quite a potion like an alchemist, but using their magical ability to draw stuff out that would make certain natural medicines a little bit more potent. But
Eh,
maybe it just became a lot to ask. And maybe Tommy had one of those dumbass moments whenever you're a teenager or a young person and you decide that you know better. And Steven's like, hey man, I need you. And what if Tommy just made a bad call? So now you're introducing consequences of your actions. And again, creating drama when you're creating these characters can be incredibly rich because now Tommy has a small group of friends, a rival, but maybe someone they want to reconnect with, and they've got problems of their own. Obviously, being a ghoul, you mentioned the small town. In Shadowrun, one of the things that is often dealt with is racism. And in the world of Shadowrun, you've got elves, you've got orcs, you've got trolls, you've got dwarves, and in later editions, many metahuman variants. But for the most part, good old plain humans are the majority. But sometimes people don't like it when you grow tusks, and when you develop certain bone deposits in your brain, maybe you take a hit to intelligence. So racism starts coming in. There's a group in Shadowrun called Alamos 20K. And Alamos 20K is a terrorist group not too dissimilar to the KKK, if I recall correctly. There was even a major event where they bombed a facility and a lot of people died. So maybe, let's make this really rich. Tommy's mom, or it's not Tommy's mom, Steven's mom was in a relationship with someone who was a part of one of these metahuman hate groups, and their friendship survived despite the family not liking who Tommy was because he's one of the magical freaks.
Yeah.
So now it's gotten really interesting. And this is the thing, right? Because when you're writing these characters, you're spending hours with your friends around a table or on a Discord call or whatever, and you're inhabiting these people. And it can be really interesting for you to really live and breathe that. And especially when it comes to writing a better backstory, I'm not saying everybody has to do this. This is just from my own personal experience, and I want to get your perspective on this too, Damien, is when you get into the lore, I'm not expecting everybody to know the history or every book or every novel or every piece of ancillary media that's ever been written. But if you take the time to do the homework, most setting books, with the exception of, like, say, Battletech, are like maybe 15, 20 pages long. I know with Shadowrun, it's like 20 pages, at least as of second or third edition. It's not that much, but there's tons of extra material if you want to read it. So when you take the time to invest your personal time and develop your interests, what we've created with Tommy thus far is not just a stat block, right? Like, we're pretty sure if we had to break Tommy down for stats, and then I'll throw this to you, Damien, they have a reasonably high intelligence, a good willpower, probably lower than average constitution because of the need of being a ghoul. They may be physically tough, but maybe there's something to that, right? Maybe they're frail in some other sort of way. And maybe, obviously, with them having a condition, I will say, they're not probably high on the charisma track, because if they have to put up a disguise spell, that's going to tax their concentration. So maybe when they go out to meet Mr. Johnson, who is the people who often give you Shadowruns, maybe they're like, yeah, great, can we get this over with? Because they're concentrating so hard as they don't drop their spell. Because if they do, and you randomly, a ghoul shows up in the middle of a bar, people are going to start screaming. And there's most often a ghoul bounty offered by many cities because they're often seen as a pest. A lot of people try to fight for metahuman and ghoul rights, but not everybody agrees with it. So, yeah, Damien. So, okay, where else can we take Tommy to make them a little bit more interesting? Because now we've defined them mechanically. We have taken their early life before the first session starts. So, where does this character go? Or what other pieces of advice and general conversation can we really bring out as to make some of these characters better?
So I think for what we have for Tommy, that if I was going to be running a game and somebody were to bring that backstory to me, I would be perfectly happy with that. Because it kind of ticks all of the boxes that I personally you have your friends, you have your rivals, you have some definitely big events. Honestly, the only other thing that I would want out of that really,
Mm-hmm.
would be like the names of Tommy's parents.
Okay.
That would be about it. And that would be one of those things that it's like, it's not necessary, but it's kind of a nice to have.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I did want to mention though, and sorry, I'll
Mm-hmm.
throw it back
Yes,
to you
please.
after I mention this,
Mm-hmm.
is don't be afraid as well when doing your backstory to put things out in point form.
Yes.
As
You
long as
don't.
you hit the points,
Yeah.
yeah, like as long as you hit the points, the the nitty gritty details can be filled in as
Yeah. Because, like, for example, I'm a writer by trade. I tend to write things out, but I don't like if Damien was my game master or storyteller, I'm not going to hand you 3,000 words plus. That's pretty easy for me to do, but that's not nice either. Because when you're creating backstories, again, the story hasn't started yet. You're just giving these people like the back of the DVD case, so to speak, but you're making sure there's life there too. Like, don't hand someone a novel. And I think that's kind of where we should take our conversation next is like, we've done some pretty good practices here, but now we got to start looking at what you maybe shouldn't be doing. And there are certain dungeon tubers that I follow, like the Dungeon Dudes, D&D Shorts, and they're more focused on power, sometimes some story stuff too. But I remember I was listening to this is a wonderful dungeon tuber. I love them to death. They use a avatar and they're known as D&D Doge. It's literally
yeah,
a Shiba Inu and they tell amusing stories from Reddit.
and show cats.
And yes, and show cats. I love them. And it's like when you create these characters, you don't want to be Goku at the end of the Tournament of Power. What do I mean by that? Well, you're a level 1 character, and we're just going to probably use D&D from kind of here on out, or maybe we'll refer to Tommy here and there. But it's like, okay, awesome. I'll just use Tommy as an example. I am Tommy, and I have defeated hordes of armies. I've led mercenaries to the fields of battle in Azlazan, and I have conquered the Seattle underworld. But I only have 6 points in sorcery. That doesn't track. And while some people will write these awesome backstories, and some of them can work, so let me get that out of the way. So if you might be the long lost heir to an empire or a prince or a king in exile, you can do that, but you're not going to be throwing down with Vegeta in the first episode and expect to win. Because some of the backstories I've seen cross my table are like, oh yeah, I used to be this super badass and I would, kick the crap out of like, I don't know, Lord Soth from Dragonlance or something. And it's like, you're level 1. What are you doing? And it has to be good practice to create characters that are not just believable, but haven't had all the interesting stuff happen to them. I mean, even with Tommy's backstory, they've had some really bad stuff happen to them, but it's you're not going to be role playing a 12-year-old getting their abilities. And maybe you could. Maybe you're playing Master, Kids on Bikes or something. But that's not when the action happens, right? Tommy has a really interesting story to set up where adventure goes next. But if you've already conquered the Seattle underworld, you've taken on the Yakuza and the Triads, okay, what do you want? You want to fight Loftwire and, take on a behemoth with a Panther assault cannon? Okay, cool. I guess we can do that with your 4 points in firearms. It doesn't work. But when we come back, I want to hear Damien's thoughts on some tropes that work, some tropes that don't. We're going to help you make better characters in your role-playing game. Once again, I've been Mike the Birdman. That's been Damien. And when we come back, cool stuff is going to happen only on Guelph Community Radio, the Spellbook.
Hey, this is Connor Morand, and you're listening to CFRU 93.3 FM in Guelph, also available at cfru.ca.
Everything is gold, but
Welcome back to the Spellbook, right here on 93.3 CFRU, Guelph Community Radio. When we left off, we were talking about backstories and, some things that you kind of should and shouldn't do, and like some kind of backstory tropes. So one of the things, like when you were talking, Mike, about the, the whole, I was super powerful, I slaughtered multiple people backstory trope. And it is at this point, enough people have used it. I would say it's a fairly standard trope. The only one way that you can make that really work is if you follow it up with the "and I lost all of my powers."
Yeah.
Where, yeah, okay, you know what? You want to play, your backstory is that you were John Wick. Okay.
Yeah.
You somehow were injured. You got amnesia.
Jason Bourne.
Yeah. And you were starting right back at level 1. Maybe you were caught at the end of all of this by on your last job, and there was some mental conditioning done, and it set you back to the beginning, and you have to get that back. You have to fight through that. That's awesome. That's a perfect way to deal with that. Then you can have your "I am John Wick" as a backstory and get back to that point in play.
Yeah, so this allows you to stretch your storytelling legs, so to speak, to create that ultimate power fantasy that you want. You still get to tell the cool story that you were John Wick, the Baba Yaga, but then something happened to you.
Yeah.
Another trope that I hope people don't, but it kind of falls along the same line is, oh, I come descended from the aristocracy, or I'm incredibly rich. I'm a spoiled rich kid. And now you've given yourself in your backstory infinite money. That can be a problem. And I've seen some people try to sneak it in at my table. Sometimes I'll say, okay, so you have a background that suggests you do not want for much. You have a life of luxury, so to speak. Pardon me. Okay. You can have a magical item or something. Asterix. What does that mean? Well, if you're willing to try to mess with your DM's story before it even starts by giving yourself the infinite kind of money glitch, okay, fine. I'm going to allow Tommy, for some reason, has access to 1 million new yen. Okay. But that's not through your character's background. You didn't pay for that. Okay. Doesn't matter. Maybe that money's stolen. So you can have your money, but I'm going to have fun too. But that's kind of, this will probably be another show. We're probably going to talk about this kind of later on at some point during the course of the summertime. But as a DM, when one of your players at your tables, because we're going to assume you have this relationship of trust, you don't want to weaponize their backgrounds against them too badly. Now, you can take plot threads, and that's okay. And how I define the difference between those two is a plot thread is Steven, the friends, and that's cool. Weaponizing that background against them, Tommy's a ghoul. He has to eat. Now I'm going to make sure I'm tracking that. But maybe that's a story you don't want to tell, right? Like maybe they just find a way, they go to the local morgue, they pay off the mortician, and they get the Jane and John Does that happen to be missing in the street. It's unfortunate, but that's just how it is. So maybe that works. But when you weaponize someone's really cool backstory, again, to use the John Wick example, let's say, what happened with John Wick? He got out. He helped, I can't remember the guys. I think his name was Victor, killed all his enemies in one night because it was the impossible job.
Yeah.
and then someone took his puppy. And obviously, that's a great story.
Yeah.
But now they have the entirety of the high table because you stuck your pinky toe back in and they warned you, if you're going to do this, there is no coming back. You got out. Nobody gets out. What are you doing? And maybe that's the story you want to play. You mentioned amnesia, and I think I said that right.
You did.
There are sometimes people will use that as an easy out because they don't want to write something. And again, I'm not expecting you to be George R.R. Martin. I'm not expecting you to be Stephen King. I'm not even expecting you to be Stephanie Meyer, okay? I don't need epic, sweeping novels. I do not need the Odyssey. What I want you to do is to be engaged. Like, when you're writing a story, yeah, honestly, what is the motivation? Some people will say, I want to get rich. Okay, why? Tommy, what's his reason for getting New Yen? Well, we've kind of layered that into his backstory. He needs the flesh to survive. He needs materials so he can be this enchanter or this talismonger. And he's going to need to upkeep a certain lifestyle so people don't start looking at them sideways. So, you want to give your characters motivation to go out adventuring. Like the person who lost their memory, how would they approach, why are they going out, Damien?
Well, and like that's the thing, and that honestly is one of the things that I am kind of the opposite of you when it comes to something like amnesia.
Mm-hmm.
I love like that's one of those ones that like if one of the players at my table's like, yeah, I wasn't really able to think of something. Can we go with amnesia for my character? The first thing I tell them is like, okay, but I then get to choose. I then get to make up the characters from your backstory and choose their relationships with you. It's not always going to be bad, but it's also not always going to be good. I am basically, when it's at my table, saying you have amnesia is basically saying, okay, you have carte blanche to run with my backstory.
Yeah.
Now, that's a thing of trust that you need. Like
Yes.
like you can't do that with a GM that is ridiculously malicious. But I'm still gonna have fun with it because you were kind of lazy.
Yeah.
But
And
at the same time, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, you've really hit on something so important, and I'm glad you mentioned it. When you create characters, when you create backstories, and I'm glad you mentioned the amnesia angle because we play these games to have fun. And these are typically your friends that you sit around with. Maybe it's a paid game master like me. It's a start playing GM. But more often than not, it's people from your friend group. And you're trusting them with this. And with someone like you, Damien, I would trust you because I know you're a good storyteller. But more so than anything else when it comes to you, you're fair. But I also know you're interesting. You want to give me a good time. Because unless you have trust with your table, sure, we might have a few sessions where we fire off our guns, we sling our swords, we slay the monster. But if we're not having fun, if there's no trust at the table, if you're being penalized for something silly, either on your behalf or the game master's behalf, where's the fun? Where's the trust? And like I said, with you, I trust you to create characters. Like even right now in the game you and I are playing, you and I have enough trust in each other where I've basically handed you, I want you to help me build the economy for this up and coming city. I don't have the mental capacity to run this entire thing myself, but I trust you because it's in your backstory and I've given you an opportunity. Because in your backstory, you mentioned you came from a technical school in the world of Faerun. You are looking to learn your craft bigger and better and expand. And I trusted you enough to say, hey, here's a piece of our world. Please run it.
And that I'm glad that you brought that up because that was going to be one of the things that I was gonna mention, like, because we have only a few minutes left here,
Mm-hmm.
is that as a player, don't be afraid to use your backstory. As Mike mentioned, right now I'm playing an artificer by the name of Tinker, who one of the things that they did in their very first session is they dropped 15 gold to invest in a local blacksmith, to essentially become a partner in that business to, kind of help further my goals as a player, help further their goals as a character, and also kind of add to the world. It's not just the GM that uses your backstory and your history and your background. You, as the player, should be using that as
Yeah, because the more you can influence the world, the more your friends are going to jump in and say, "Hey," for example, using Tinker, like, "Hey, Tinker, I need something built. Could you maybe put in an order with Phil?" I think that's what I named the character at the local blacksmith shop. "Can you do something?" "Why, yes, I can," sort of thing. And again, you're building a relationship. And the fact that your character is now establishing a major plot point, because these characters are new to this city and they have to establish relationships as mercenaries. So now you're building a foundation for recurring NPCs, for recurring relationships that may or may not have consequences down the road. Because let's say Tinker's gone off on a mission for 3 or 4 months across the continent and he can't just teleport home. What does that do to the relationship? Is someone from your group maintaining this or something like that? Or is there a communication breakdown because your character's not there? Stuff like that. And that's what we want you to think about. At the end of the day, have your stories have consequences, and consequences are not always bad. Like, much like in real life, you miss every chance you don't take. For every time you don't ask out the pretty boy or, the pretty girl, or when you decide to, maybe I'll catch the next bus or whatever. You want to have adventure. You want to have fun. So, closing thoughts from you, Damien, and then take us home, buddy.
As I said, as a GM, don't hesitate to use your players' backstories, and as a player, don't hesitate to use your backstory. Even if you can, other players willing, integrate your backstory with somebody else's, that can add layers of depth that can help with the role play and help with the narrative later on, because we're all doing this to have
Exactly. Get in there, collaborate, talk. But ultimately, throw them bones down, have some fun. So, guys, we are just about out of time here on the Spellbook. Next week on the show, we're going to give you some bigger, badder, evil guys. We're going to be talking about villains in your game. And I'm really excited to talk about this one with Damien. So anyway, guys, be sure to follow us on social media. We are just about out of time. So once again, for the Spellbook, we have been...
I am Damien.
I am Mike the Birdman, saying be excellent to each other. We'll catch you guys next time right here on 93.3 CFRU. This has been the Spellbook.
It's not enough. We have a gallery of villains to look out for, but now we could be infiltrated by a shape changer. I can't even tell if any of you are acting strange because you've been replaced or because this group is full of weirdos.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Spellbook. If you happen to have any comments or suggestions, please send us an email at thespellbookshow@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're hungry for more, you can find Mike at thisweekingeek.net, covering a variety of nerdy topics, and Damien on YouTube at Magical Hack Makes for more TTRPG conversation.
That's it, man. Game over.